Will Wade's comments directed at North Carolina good for the rivalry, or is he just an annoying bug on the windshield?
This is Tyler Hansbrough, and you're listening to Locked On Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Friday. It's June 20th, 2025. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shader, joining me at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch to get your weekend going the right way. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Special shout out to all the everydayers here with us, all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, and of course, our Locked On Tar Heels insiders. Joining me on the show today, it's my good buddy, Mr. Josh Marlow. It's great to see him at HTB_Josh there on the social media machine, part of the Heel Tough blog, Heel Tough Pod, Four Corners Pod, Mr. Producer extraordinaire doing everything he does. A renaissance man, really, if we're being honest. So here's where Josh and I are headed today on the show. We're going to look at some more about the Will Wade comments. I talked about it earlier in the week, but Josh is there in the thick of it and just wanted to be able to bounce it back and forth with him some. The last time we talked, we actually talked on the show about how Carolina was still looking for a shooter. They got that now in Luka Bogavac, but we want to have a conversation about, is that enough? Does that make Carolina championship quality? And then now that the season, the whole athletics year is officially over, I asked Marlow to kind of come up with his 3 favorite moments of this past year and share those with us, because I love those look backs and I just thought it would be fun. So Marlow, let's get into the Will Wade comments. I've got the bleep button ready, and I just want to ask you about it. Look, I talked about it earlier in the week, but just by myself, I want to have a conversation with you about it. And here's how I'll frame it and ask you. Is Will Wade's personality and dynamic, is that good for the Carolina State rivalry? Is it good for the ACC? Or is it really just an annoyance, a bump on the timeline of this rivalry?
I think the answer is yes to both questions. You look at it from the Carolina State rivalry perspective. This is the attitude that I think NC State has been lacking in the rivalry. Is someone that I don't think is afraid to challenge Carolina, is not afraid to stand up to now Hubert Davis and what the Tar Heels have done on the basketball playing surface. Because, when Roy Williams was in town, it was a known thing that Carolina was going to beat State twice a year. And usually they were going to beat them pretty badly. And now you're bringing a coach into the triangle that is accomplished, that does have a track record of winning. At VCU, a mid-major program where that program expects to win year in, year out. He did win at LSU, got in trouble for the way that he won at LSU, but that doesn't matter in the world we live in now, where all that stuff is practically legal. And then the job he did at McNeese, there's no denying that it does feel like for the first time in my lifetime, they have a competitive hire to make this rivalry a rivalry again. And I think it's something that I know as a Carolina fan, I crave that, right? Because when I fell in love with this program 15 years ago and I started learning about the history, yes, you knew that Carolina and Duke was the premier rivalry in the sport, in the conference, but it wasn't always the case. It was Carolina and State first, going all the way back to the 1950s, really through the 1970s. That was the rivalry in the conference. That's why they played the second most top 10 matchups in college basketball history, right behind the matchup, of course, with Duke. So, yes, it's good for the rivalry, but it's also annoying because he hasn't done anything of consequence yet at NC State, but yet he is being praised by the national college basketball media and put on this pedestal as someone that has accomplished more than Hubert Davis, despite never making a Final Four, despite never having coached in a national championship game. And you look at his SEC championship shade, Look at the year that was in. That was in 2019. And what did that get LSU that year in the tournament? They were a 3 seed. It wasn't like he won the SEC in this past year where that was maybe the best college basketball conference of all time.
Dude,
that
no
was
joke.
before the SEC really committed to investing in basketball. And you can praise him for winning a championship at LSU, and rightfully so. But I do think that some of the praise is just too premature because this is not a program that gets the benefit of the doubt. Not when you have not done anything of significance outside of a miracle run to the Final Four in the last 35 to 40 years. And when I hear the way Jeff Goodman, John Rothstein, the guys I work with just praise him and really elevate him over the stats of Hubert Davis, it is annoying because last time I checked, you look at the Triangle coaches, John Shire has a coach in a national championship game. We can lament that Hubert's missed the tournament and has had some struggles. He's still the most accomplished coach right now in the Triangle. And so I think Will Wade right now is doing a lot of talking. Cannot wait to see how it translates onto the basketball court because, he might have his tail tucked between his legs after these two teams meet this upcoming basketball season.
And unfortunately, Marlow, meet just that one time. I'm still pretty about that. I'm not looking forward to that. But I love your point about NC State not really having someone of his kind of temperament on the basketball coaching side, right? Like Dave Doran's been that on the football side, right? Like he is clearly his equal in those regards. But that wasn't Sidney Lowe's vibe. That wasn't Mark Gottfried's vibe. That wasn't, any of these NC State coaches that we've seen on the sideline. And so it certainly does gas it up in a fun way. And look, I guess that makes it all the more fun. Like keep gassing them up, Goodman and others that you talked about, because that'll make the fall all the more precipitous and all the more glorious when it inevitably crashes and burns. Although, as you said, Will Wade is a good basketball coach and he has won where he's been, but this is a different ball game now. And Marlow, here's the other funny thing to me. We look at his comments from this past week, the whole Van Allen Lubin thing. Now with Paul Mbia leaving NC State, I guess Van Allen's going to have to definitely play that 28 plus minutes. What did you make of that whole situation?
Well, I thought it was the perfect representation of why Will Wade fits there is because what is the one thing they're consumed by? It's Carolina. As long as we're competing, as long as we're in the same neighborhood as Carolina, that's what that program, that's what that fan base cares about. That's how they measure themselves. For North Carolina, we measure ourselves. Maybe you could say we measure ourselves against Duke because that's a national power 8 miles down the road that's competing for conference and national championships. But Carolina holds itself to a higher guard than what the guys in Raleigh are doing. But that's not the way it is for that program. And then, you look at the 28 minutes mark that he referenced, and then Kevin Sweeney, who does a great job covering the sport, really comes down and shows you why you shouldn't play Van Allen Lubin 28 minutes a night, because the more he plays, the more his team loses. And what upset me was that it put me in a position to criticize Van Allen, even more so than I already did for him leaving. And, I did call him a sellout because he chased the money to go play for the Wolfpack. But, Van Allen Lubin's a good basketball player. He's a solid basketball player. He's not perfect. And, I know the things that were said, that were tweeted about him during his struggles this past year at Carolina. That fan base is going to be a whole lot worse when they're watching him not catch bounce passes. And that happened quite a bit during his lone season in Chapel Hill. So, and then there's just a distinct difference. Playing 28 minutes at North Carolina and playing 28 minutes at NC State is different. And that's going to sound like an insult. And that's my intention, is to insult them. Because we expect more. If you're playing 28 minutes at Carolina as a big man, you should be putting up a double-double and being a first-team All-ACC guy and competing to be an All-American. You play 28 minutes at NC State because you lack front court depth, and that's certainly the case right now for that program.
I want to make that the clip from the show that goes all over social media. That's going to sound like an insult, and that's good because I intended to be. Dude, that's so good. But legitimately, like, I love your point. Like, I don't want to have to be put in the position to criticize Van Allen, right? Like, he was great down the stretch for North Carolina. He did some solid things. He was great. But basically, you, Will Wade, are gassing up who was going to be our backup center this year. That's what you're doing, right? And like, so congrats. That's good. But I don't like that feels icky to me to have to lambast this guy that stepped in at a tough time when Carolina didn't have the front court they needed last year. And that's kind of frustrating. All right, Marlow, I mentioned it earlier, but since you and I last chatted here on the show, the Heels have indeed added Luka Bogavac to this roster. My question that I want you to answer, does that put them where they need to be in that national conversation, that championship level type team that you were talking about just a second ago? We'll talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, the MLB season is heating up and every game brings clutch hits, standout pitching, and unforgettable moments. From walk-off homers to no-hitters in the making, there's no shortage of drama on the diamond. And no better time to get in on the action because FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game, both before the first pitch and live. With player props, performance trends, same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big. Marlow and I were talking a little bit before the show about the upcoming football season. FanDuel has Carolina at 7.5 wins, over under on that. Looking at that schedule, gang, I think you got to go ahead and take that over because woof, if they don't hit 8, that's going to be frustrating. Are you new to FanDuel? Now's the perfect time to sign up. Head on over to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. So go ahead and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Marlow, we talked, month and a half ago now. I can't remember how long ago it was, but we were talking about how, we expect Drake Powell to stay in the draft. He has done so. Hopefully we'll see him drafted really high next Wednesday night in the first round of the draft. But we said in the same breath that meant Carolina really needed to add a frontline starter at the 3, at the small forward, and it needed to be somebody who could shoot at a high level. They've done that. They went out and got Luka Bogavac, got to get him to campus. Good grief, got to make that happen so we can get worked in with the team. But you just mentioned in the last segment that Carolina does not measure themselves against the NC States of the world. They measure themselves against national championships, against Duke and Kansas and UConn. That's the level we're talking about. So my kind of more direct question to you is, does this addition of Luka Bogavac put Carolina where they expect to be in that tier?
I would say today, no. I think right now they're not a national title team, a national title contender, but that doesn't mean that they can't morph into that and they can't transition into that. Look at the team that just won the national championship in the Florida Gators. Were they a team that we were talking about in June, July, and August going into last year as a program that could compete for a national title? No. We knew they had a good head coach. We knew they had a great backcourt, but that's about all we knew. We did not know that what they would, eventually become. I really look at what Hubert Davis has done this year. You're talking about 9 new players coming in, 5 transfers, an international pro, and then the freshmen. And this roster, I think, is made up kind of like it was 2 years ago. And that was a team that in June and July, I don't think we were talking about as Final Four threat. But by the time we got to December, and of course, once we got into March, that's what that team was.
That's right.
And so I think as long as we get Luka here and integrated with, first off, the team on the court, but just the Chapel Hill way of life, because it's going to be, I think, a big cultural adjustment from where he's coming from internationally. I do think that he's going to elevate Carolina's ceiling to where I think they would be, bona fide top 4 team in the ACC, and then a team that's getting a pretty good seed come Selection Sunday. So that answer to me right now is no, but this coaching staff and front office was very intentional of what they wanted to add to the roster when they flipped it. And, for a first-time GM and Jim Tanner on board, trying to, lay out and bring that vision to life with Hubert Davis, I think you got to give them credit for the way this roster came together. Luka became the guy that was the most important consequence because you needed a perimeter scorer, and they got that. So I think he elevates Carolina's ceiling to a team that could contend to make the second weekend. And even though that's not the expectation and the standard at Carolina, if that happens this year, Shade, you get your answer about Hubert Davis. And I think that's the most important thing for the upcoming year is getting a firm evaluation on, is Hubert Davis the right man to lead Carolina basketball for the next 10 to 15 years? Or is he a guy that when the season comes to an end, we maybe have to have a hard conversation about this program going in a different direction?
Okay, so that said, let me follow up with this then. What do you think is that kind of demarcation line for this year? Meaning, what level of success or failure would lean you one way or the other? Like if I put it, let me just come up maybe with an over under in real time for that. Let's say 31 regular season games, let's say 21-10 regular season, making the ACC semifinal and the second weekend. Is that enough in your opinion?
It's enough for me in the short term.
Yeah.
Because, you still look at long term, I think that would not be meeting the mark. And, one thing I've done on my podcast when I've talked to people this offseason is kind of gauge what they think Hubert Davis he needs to do. And I got told by Nada Edwards, the guy that's the producer of the Eye on College Basketball podcast, he'd have fired him after last year, which I think is still wild when you think of the fact that he's, won a pretty high significant number of games. And then you look at what he's done in March where he's not been one and done in the NCAA tournament. I think the demarcation for us having that hard conversation is if, we get the Selection Sunday, Shade, and Carolina's team number 68 of 68, and they get bounced in the first round, then I think you're looking at a situation where you gotta discuss where Carolina is at, because that would make it 4 of the 5 years you were firmly, squarely on the NCAA tournament bubble, with 1 year missing altogether, and that's just not acceptable here. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that the schedule looks the way the schedule looks in November and December because of what they went through last year. I think he wants to give his team, which is going to be basically brand new, time to learn how to play with each other and build chemistry and maybe figure out rotations in the non-con, as opposed to still trying to sort that all out in mid-February because you played such a tough schedule the first 2 months of the year. So I don't think we're going to have that hard conversation because I think he's going to win enough games, and this roster is going to give him more flexibility than what he had to work with last year.
Yes.
But you can't rule it out, because the simple truth of the matter is 3 of his 4 years, you could argue before he got to the tournament, they weren't meeting the mark in the regular season.
Yeah, man. And I'm very curious to see what that 13th. There's one non-con opponent we don't yet know, and I'm really curious to see if that's another bye game or if it is another kind of, like another high major opponent. That'll be really interesting. Kind of to your points about how they're going to navigate this non-con schedule. Very curious to see how this year goes. What is the Jim Tanner effect? Yes, it's not, outside of Henri, Veesaar, maybe it's not the biggest, highest, coolest names that were in the transfer portal. But Marlow, something I think I've taken to say in the last couple of days actually is just because they don't have a name doesn't mean they don't have game. And I'm really curious to see what that chemistry is, right? Because it's not about having to have the best 5 individuals, but it's about having the best, unit in its entirety and how that fits together. So I'm super curious to see how that comes all together, man.
Oh yeah, so am I. I think what's going to be the most annoying thing we talk about this year is the number that's attached to this roster, and that's 14 million. Because if Carolina wins 25 plus games, they win an ACC regular season title, They advance to the Sweet 16 or beyond. Well, you spent $14 million on your roster. You should win those amount of games. And then on the flip side, if you're not winning, well, how could Carolina not win with $14 million on its roster? I think it's really important to add the context to it. You brought in 9 new players.
Yeah.
You brought in, and by bringing in 9 new players means you're paying 9 new players to come play for you. Every single one of these players that Carolina added to their roster, they gave some monetary value. They committed some monetary value to, on top of retaining a Seth Trimble, and even a guy like James Brown, who had no role the second half of the year. He's not staying at Carolina for nothing. Like, you still had to invest in him to keep him a part of your roster. And so, I know rev share is going to be a part of how that money gets distributed. But I think, one thing I've kind of talked about is I don't think Carolina is going to spend $14 million on its roster year in, year out, because the hope is that you're not, sending 7 guys out and welcoming 9 guys in that you effectively have to pay. So I love the whole, just because they may not have a name, they may not have a game, or they don't have a game. I think this is going to be a team. Yeah. And last year, and I got caught up in it too, I spent so much of last year's offseason just focused on get 4 back, get 4 back, get 4 back. I want to watch this kid play one more year. They didn't have a team around RJ Davis. Like, you put RJ Davis with the team that I think they've built around Kyan Evans and Seth Trimble, yeah, I think Carolina would have won a lot more games than they won a year ago. And so to me, this year has the makings of a prototypical Carolina team that they're going to be a group that's better in December than they were in November. They're better in January than they were in December. They're better in February than they were in January, with the ultimate hope of them playing their absolute best in March. And if they can do that, I think they'll make the kind of noise we want and we expect to see as Carolina fans.
And I love, in that same vein you just said, the comp you made to 2 years ago, where there was a big fire sale, brought a bunch of guys in, and went all the way to that 1 seed, and just got upended by Alabama on a cold shooting night that stopped them from moving on there to the Elite Eight. So hopefully this will be that type of team that when we get to this point next year and I say, all right, Marlow, we're going to go to the last segment with baseball and track and field wrapping up. The year is done and it's time to do some reflecting. I want to hear your top 3 favorite moments from this past year. Hopefully you're able to talk about basketball in a big way when we get there. But that's where Josh and I are going to head to wrap up the show, coming up in just a second. Always fun to talk to my buddy Josh Marlow, and we're going to wrap the show with reminiscing. Y'all, I am a sucker for looking back. I have a problem, I have a habit, and I always love to do it, and it just makes me emotional. And so I was just like, I know Josh thinks about and loves all of this stuff so much. So I asked Marlow to bring his 3 favorite memories of the past athletics year. Marlow, I'll let you go in whatever order you want. If you want to go 3 to 1, 1 to 3, if it's just 3 things and it's not in any order, however you want to handle it, I'm just going to give you the floor.
All right, I'll go 3, 2, and then we'll go with number 1. Number 3, and maybe because this was prisoner of the moment, and maybe when, to be quite honest, I start kind of checking in, I'll go with Carolina winning the ACC baseball tournament. Because it was fun, it was exciting. They did so in rather dominant fashion and had us all believing and dreaming and talking about Omaha. And it's still kind of wild to think that they won the first game of the Super Regional 18-2 and did not advance to the Men's College World Series. But, as someone that really, that's when, quite frankly, I start watching and paying attention to the college baseball season, because where it runs and where it coincides with the college basketball season was a lot of fun, was a lot of exciting, and it really hyped us up for what we thought was going to be another trip to Omaha for a program that's, outside of Arkansas and Florida State, has gotten as close as any other baseball program in the sport to winning a national championship without having done so. So that's my number 3 moment. My number 2, let's give some love to women's lacrosse winning another national championship. I think it's one thing whenever we talk about conference realignment and maybe Carolina's future in the ACC is you've seen with some of these schools that have, jumped ship and left conferences, it's the Olympic sports, it's the non-revenue sports that take a big hit. And I think it's something that Carolina, we value and we pride ourselves about.
Yes.
Of course, you had the legendary Coach Smith quote that, hey, we're a women's soccer school. We're just trying to keep up. And then you look at all the other great programs that Carolina has, men and women's lacrosse, men's and women's tennis, field hockey with what Aaron Madson's done as a player and as a coach. We are just more than just a basketball school. We have an entire athletic department that does compete for championships at the highest level. So give them some love. And then my number one moment, maybe this is off the wall, it's the Bill Belichick hire. Because of everything that went into the 24 to 48 hours leading up to it, and then the 24 to 48 hours that came out of it. Because when it first got reported, it was, this is not happening. Why would Bill Belichick go coach at North Carolina? Why would he not force his way into the NFL? And then when it became real and you're sitting there as a Carolina fan and someone like me that loves Carolina football, season ticket holder, I go to, games every single year. I have dreamed of winning at the highest level. Like 2015 was a taste. You go 11-1. You take Clemson to the wire in the ACC title game. A few years ago, you're 9-1. You're 6-0. And then those seasons don't end the way that they end. I don't even think those exciting years made me feel the way that hiring Bill Belichick made me feel. Because it was surreal that you've got the greatest coach in football history on campus. And we know there's been some stuff off the field with his relationship that's kind of gotten in the way. But I think when it all comes down to football, when it's all about football, he's going to give us something to cheer about in ways that we haven't got to cheer about as Carolina football fans. So I hate the way that we had to get to Bill Belichick. I hate that it was a messy end and divorce for Mac Brown because Lord knows he has not taken it too kindly. He's been very personal about it and very blunt about it. But as a Carolina football fan that's dreamed of competing and winning at the highest level, I've never felt closer to them when we hired Bill Belichick. So that's probably been my favorite moment the last sport calendar year, which is sad because I was hoping to talk about a win over Duke and Cooper Flag, but we got denied that 3 times.
Oh, that third time they should have won. Oh, that's so painful. Josh, I've joked that the whole Jordan Hudson thing is something that Bill Belichick has done to distract everyone from what's actually happening on the field. And it's just like him being so conniving that people would never think. He's just distracted. It's like a good magician's like, look over here, not at what's actually happening.
Well, it's funny because we've kind of talked about that too, where it's like, is this like the ultimate game of chess being played by Bill Belichick? And I've shared this story a couple of times. A few weeks ago, I was having lunch at a Logan's in the Gastonia area. And my waitress, I was decked out in Carolina gear, go figure. She goes to Carolina, back home for the summer. But she's like, yeah, I interned for the football program back in the spring. And so I asked her, I said, I got to know. I said, what's Jordan, what's the Jordan Hudson thing? And she's like, I never once saw her. Of course, we saw her at the spring game and we're all sitting here wondering, how involved is she? Well, I had an intern tell me, I never once saw her in or around the facility. The facility. So whether it's because she was banned or not, I don't care. And quite to be fair, as long as they win, I don't care what Jordan Hudson's doing. But I do think that there is some substance to that, where Bill Belichick thought of the greatest way to create a bunch of noise outside of the program and just focus on his team as he is adjusting to life as a college football coach.
Oh, man, that would be so next level. That's a great anecdote, by the way, Marlow. Good for you for doing all the investigatory journalism.
Take that, Pablo Torre.
Yeah. In Chris Lang's hometown, the stomping grounds. I love it, man. That's good stuff. And yeah, I love number 2 there. Absolute dominant season from the lacrosse team. You mentioned the women's soccer team in the same breath, their national championship. Man, just really good stuff. I'm still like mourning as a, lifelong baseball player, went to college on a baseball scholarship. I am mourning the baseball team not making the World Series. And honestly, I don't know, man, Coastal Carolina is on one right now. I don't know if they would have got past them, but we'll see what happens this weekend. Coastal and LSU going to be really interesting. And Marlow, for you, what a great representation of just a world of Carolina football fans who have for their lives felt all the things that you just enumerated and enunciated so well that you've waited for. And, good grief, can Bill Belichick please be the guy that delivers all that we've always waited to see? Could this be the moment? I hope so. And hopefully there's no ref that can call offsides on an onside kick to stop it from happening, man. May that come to fruition. Can't wait to see it. Joshua Marlow, thank you so much for joining me. Folks, please make sure you go check out all of Josh's great work on Four Corners Podcast, on all the Healed Tough stuff. You can follow him at HTB_Josh. Marlow, I know you said, I saw recently, I think it was on Twitter, you said, I got some fun stuff, like a series kind of coming up this summer on Four Corners. Talk about what that is. What's going on?
Yeah, we're launching the What If series. Trying to, we've never done an off-season series in the history of the pod. Trying to find some great fun off-season content. And so we're going to do the biggest what ifs in Carolina basketball history, decade by decade, dating back to the 1950s, because that's really when Carolina basketball, with the arrival of Frank McGuire, the emergence of that 1957 team, that's when basketball became king on campus. That's when basketball became king in the state. So we're going to start that journey next week.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it'll be a great history lesson for young Carolina fans that may not know all the ins and outs of how Carolina basketball became what it's become today, which in my opinion is the prominent program in the sport. So me and Anthony are pretty fired up about that. So you can check that anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify. But yeah, we're launching the What If series. I think it's going to be a lot of fun kind of diving into some of the biggest, what ifs in the history of a program that has a lot of them.
Yeah, man, that's super cool. I'm geeked about it already. I wondered if it would be something like that, but I hadn't had a chance to ask you. So, gang, please make sure you go check that out. Starting, you said next week, right, Marlow?
Yep. Next week.
Gosh, that's going to be great stuff. So, gang, go check that out. Also, for our show, if you've not subscribed on video and audio, make sure you do that right now. If you've not joined the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, that link is in the show notes. It's absolutely free to join. And if you want to go next level with the show, join our Locked On Tar Heels Insider program. That link is in the show notes. You get free access to all of my stats and charts and data and record books and all of that, and direct one-on-one contact with me as well. Again, that link's in the show notes. We'd love to have you there. You guys, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again next week, but until then, peace.